Welcome everyone. In this session, we'll be exploring a passage from Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth, focusing on the role of ego in comparison and self-worth. While I soak in this salt bath, practice what I preach, and choose peace of mind, choose sovereignty, and choose relaxation. Let's go ahead and begin by reading this passage. From chapter 3, the core of ego. Give me just a moment to finger through the book. Okay, here we go. I don't see too many other highlighted sections in the book from when I went through it before, but this one seems like it's really standing out. So it goes as such: the ego lives through comparison. How you are seen by others becomes the yardstick for how you see yourself. Ego's sense of self-worth is in most cases bound up with what you have achieved, what you own, how you look, and how you are perceived by others. The ego requires other people to supply it with a sense of identity. And if it cannot get positive attention, it will seek negative attention instead. Take a deep breath. Notice if any words or phrases really stood out to you. The one word or phrase that jumped out to you. No explanation needed. You're welcome to keep it short. You're welcome to share your heart out. Or, again, no explanation needed. Most people are completely identified with the voice in the head, the incessant stream of involuntary and compulsive thinking, and the emotions that accompany it, that we may describe them as being possessed by their mind. As long as you are completely unaware of this, you take the thinker to be who you are. This is the egoic mind. We call it egoic because there is a sense of self, of I, ego, in every thought, every memory, every interpretation, opinion, viewpoint, reaction, emotion. This is unconsciousness, spiritually speaking. Your thinking, the content of your mind, is of course conditioned by the past, your upbringing, culture, family background, and so on. The central core of all your mind activity consists of certain repetitive and persistent thoughts, emotions, and reactive patterns that you identify with most strongly. This entity is the ego itself. I'm feeling guided to skip ahead just a bit to another section of this chapter where it's highlighted. At other times, the fault may be there, but by focusing on it, sometimes to the exclusion of everything else, you amplify it. And what you react to in another, you strengthen in yourself. And by this, we're speaking on resentment. The emotion that goes with complaining and the mental labeling of people, and adds even more energy to the ego. Resentment means to feel bitter, indignant, aggrieved, or offended. By not reacting to the ego, you will often be able to bring out the sanity in others, which is the unconditioned consciousness, as opposed to the conditioned. At times you may have to take practical steps to protect yourself from deeply unconscious people. This you can do without making them into enemies. Your greatest protection, however, is being conscious. Somebody becomes an enemy if you personalize the unconsciousness that is the ego. Non-reaction is not weakness, but strength. Another word for non-reaction is forgiveness. To forgive is to overlook, or rather look through. You look through the ego to the sanity that is in every human being as his or her essence. Moving along to another section I have highlighted here. See if you can catch, that is to say, notice the voice in the head, perhaps in the very moment it complains about something, and recognize it for what it is. The voice of the ego, no more than a conditioned mind pattern, a thought. The moment you become aware of the ego in you, it is strictly speaking no longer the ego, but just an old, conditioned mind pattern. Ego implies unawareness. Awareness and ego cannot coexist. The old mind pattern or mental habit may still survive and reoccur for a while because it has that momentum of thousands of years of collective human unconsciousness behind it. But every time it is recognized, it is weakened. Now let's jump ahead to yet another section in the core of ego. To carry a grievance is to be in a permanent state of against. And that is why grievances constitute a significant part of many people's ego. Collective grievances can survive for centuries in the psyche of a nation or tribe and fuel a never-ending cycle of violence. A grievance is a strong negative emotion connecting to an event in the sometimes distant past that is being kept alive by compulsive thinking, or in many of our cases, not so distant past. Let's keep it a buck. And by by retelling the story in the head or out loud of what someone did to me or what someone did to us. A grievance will also contaminate other areas of your life. For example, while you think about and feel your grievance, its negative emotional energy can distort your perception of an event that is happening in the present, or influence the way in which you speak or behave towards someone in the present. One strong grievance is enough to contaminate large areas of your life and keep you in the grip of the ego. Message, yo. AA. Don't try to let go of the grievance. Trying to let go, to forgive, does not work. Forgiveness happens naturally when you see that it has no purpose other than to strengthen a false sense of self, to keep the ego in place. To see, the seeing is freeing. Jesus' teaching to forgive your enemies is essentially about the undoing of one of the main egoic structures in the mind. The past has no power to stop us from being present now, beloveds. Old grievances can. We're dealing with others who are dealing with that tug of war of they have to be right about something and make another wrong, to make us wrong. To make another wrong in order to be right, to justify. As a reminder from Eckhart himself, becoming aware of the ego is already stepping outside of it. And when we step outside of our own egos, beloveds, guess what happens? We become aware of it in others, and in turn, when we become aware of it in others, we see new to us aspects that could also potentially be analyzed within ourselves. This comes from understanding the ego. making others wrong in order to get a sense of who they are. Strengthening the ego by giving it a feeling of superiority on which it thrives. Watch out for those road ragers, collective. That's an intuitive message that I didn't ask for nor expect. Let's skip ahead to page 71. If misinterpreted, however, they become a great obstacle. The truth is inseparable from who we are. And yes, we are the truth. If we look for it elsewhere, we will be deceived every time. The very being that we are is truth. Jesus tried to convey that when he said, I am the way and the truth and the life. These words uttered are one of the most powerful and direct pointers, if understood correctly. Moving on into the highlight area, it states, Jesus speaks of the innermost I am, the essence of identity of every man and woman, every life form. In fact, he speaks of the life that you are. Some Christian mystics have called it the Christ within. Buddhists calls it Buddha nature. For Hindus, it is Atman, the indwelling God. In Law of One, Emerald Order, Freedom Teachings, we call it Source in Unity Consciousness. When you are in touch with that dimension within yourself, and being in touch with it is your natural state, not some miraculous achievement. All your actions and relationships will reflect the oneness with all life that you sense deep within. That is love. Laws, commandments, rules, and regulations necessary for those who are cut off from who they are, the truth within. Love and do what you will, said St. Augustine. Speaking of St. Augustine, Florida has definitely been on the bucket list, as well as St. Petersburg. And I can't even fathom at this moment why. But also it states in this book, words cannot get much closer to the truth than that. In terms of love and do what you will, as well as that calling to travel or be a part of certain areas of the world. That can help us get even more of that sense deep within. The ego is not personal. Can you think of a time when you or someone else sought negative attention instead of being ignored? How do you see this dynamic playing out in social media, family dynamics, or relationships today? Or even in the dark weaver and warlock culture, still trying to encourage us to be a part of some kind of mean girl, drama-ridden narrative and display. We are not here to be some kind of tool or muse put on display. Let's take a few minutes to really look a little bit deeper. Ego doesn't mind whether attention is positive or negative. As long as it gets fed, it survives. Think of a child acting out in class. It's better than being ignored. While we give it about a minute, I'm going to skip ahead to page 77 and compose myself of how I would like to share in this next portion of the core of ego. And take a few conscious breaths. All right. Here we go. It's a bit over a minute. Before we jump over to page 77, I would like to read a highlighted section from page 76. We're still in chapter 3, the core of ego. Recognize the ego for what it is, a collective dysfunction, the insanity of the human mind. When you recognize it for what it is, you no longer misperceive it as somebody's identity. Once you see the ego for what it is, it becomes much easier to remain non-reactive toward it. You don't take it personally anymore. There is no complaining, blaming, accusing, or making wrong. Nobody is wrong. It is the ego in someone, that's all. Compassion arises when you recognize that all are suffering from the same sickness of the mind, some more acutely than others. We do not fuel the drama anymore. That is part of the egoic relationships. What is its fuel? Reactivity. The ego thrives on it. Instead, we prepare a smoothie and a bug-out bag. Let's go on to page 77. Do you want peace or drama? You want peace. There is no one who does not want peace. Yet there is something else in you that wants the drama, wants the conflict. You may not be able to feel it as at this moment. You may have to wait for a situation or even just a thought that triggers a reaction in you. Someone accusing you of this or that, not acknowledging you, encroaching on your territory, questioning the way you do things, an argument about money. Can you feel there is something in you that would rather be right than at peace? All right. Now, I hope that you have taken the time to explore this in yourselves. Beyond ego, your true identity. When the ego is at war, know that it is no more than an illusion that is fighting to survive. That illusion thinks it is you. It is not easy at first to be there as the witnessing presence, especially when the ego is in survival mode or some emotional pattern from the past that has become activated. Like when the ego isn't actually copying another, they're just saying things a certain way intentionally. But even in sarcasm, they're still being authentic. That's the ego losing its grip. While the person believing they're being copycatted is entangled with their ego. But again, as I just stated, there is no wrong. All that is required to become free of the ego is to be aware of it, since awareness and ego are incompatible. Awareness is the power that is concealed within the present moment. That's why we call it presence. Moving along, spiritual realization is to see clearly that what I perceive, experience, think, or feel is ultimately not who I am. That I cannot find myself in all those things that continuously pass away. And when Jesus said, deny thyself, what he meant was negate and thus undo the illusion of self. If the self, ego, were truly who I am, it would be absurd to deny it. When I know myself as that, whatever happens in my life is no longer of absolute, but only of relative importance. I honor it. But it loses its absolute seriousness, its heaviness. The only thing that ultimately matters is this. Can we sense our essential beingness, the I am, in the background of our lives at all times? The I am that I am at this moment. Your ego always wants something from another or situations, always a hidden agenda, a sense of not enough yet. Or as some would say, money, money, money. I'm not that person, but some insufficiency in their life and lack that needs to be filled. Capitalizing on lust so they could capitalize on their lust for money, money, money. Or some other possession or person they believe to be a possession. Their person. That's not how it works. People are not property. But that ego needs to feel superior. And so the predominant states of egoic relationships are wanting and thwarted wanting, which is anger, resentment, blaming, complaining, and indifference. Now let's go into ego and fame on page 82. The well-known phenomenon of name dropping, the casual mention of who you know, or who you want to know you, or who you want to gain clout from or added attention from. That's name dropping. And it's part of the ego's strategy of gaining a superior identity in the eyes of others, and therefore in its own eyes through association with someone important. The bane of being famous in this world is that who you are becomes totally obscured by a collective mental image. Most people you meet want to enhance their identity, the mental image of who they are, through association with you. They themselves may not know that. They are not interested in you at all, but only in strengthening their ultimately fictitious sense of self. Moving along, the absurd over-validation of fame is just one of the many manifestations of egoic madness in our world. Some famous people, and maybe even locally famous to their area, fall into that same error and identify with the collective fiction, the image people in the media have created of them, and they begin to actually see themselves as superior to ordinary mortals. Message. As a result, they become more and more alienated for themselves and others, more and more unhappy and more dependent on their continuing popularity. Well, beloveds, let me tell you, I'm not here for a popularity contest. I'm here to fulfill my soul's mission. I'm not here to be surrounded by people who feed inflated self-images, becoming incapable of genuine relationships. I'm not that face of superiority, specialness, gratification. Those are all roles. I've witnessed, designed simply to get attention from others or to get our goats. Thriving on attention, which is, after all, a form of psychic energy. Let's see where to move along. We're going to take a brief look at the collective ego going into chapter 4, page 125. Wherever I am drawn to, we're going to do a little book scrying. Wherever I'm drawn to is going to be our next messages. In some cases, the personal ego seems to dissolve completely as someone dedicates his or her life to working selflessly for the greater good of the collective without demanding personal rewards, recognition, or aggrandizement. What a relief to be freed of the dreadful burden of personal self. The members of the collective feel happy and fulfilled, no matter how hard they work, how many sacrifices they make. They appear to have gone beyond ego. The question is, have they truly become free? Or has the ego simply shifted from the personal to the collective, as it manifests the same characteristics as the personal? That need for conflict and enemies, the need for more, the need to be right against others who are wrong, and so on. Sooner or later, the collective will come into conflict with other collectives because it unconsciously seeks conflict, and it needs opposition to define its boundary and thus its identity. Its members will then experience the suffering that inevitably comes in the wake of any ego-motivated action. At that point, they may wake up and realize that their collective has a strong element of insanity. All right, now let's page through a little bit more through to the end of chapter 4 and another highlighted area. If I and life are two, if I am separate from life, then I am separate from all things, all beings, all people. But how could I be separate from life? What I could there be apart from life, apart from being? It is utterly impossible. So there is no such thing as my life, and I don't have a life. I am life. I and life are one. It cannot be otherwise. So how could I lose my life? How can I lose something that I don't have in the first place? How can I lose something that I am? It is impossible. All right, so we're going to begin going into chapter 5 in the pain body. This is a chapter that I have been called to revisit myself on a more personal level for some tidbits. Starting at page 129, strictly speaking, you don't think. Thinking happens to you. The statement I think implies volition. It implies that you have a say in the matter, that there is choice involved on your part. For most people, this is not yet the case. I think is just as false a statement as I digest or I circulate my blood. Digestion happens. Circulation happens. Thinking happens. The voice in the head has a life of its own. Most people are at the mercy of that voice. They are possessed by thought, by the mind. And since the mind is conditioned by the past, you are then forced to reenact the past again and again. The Eastern term for this is karma. When you are identified with that voice, you don't know this, of course. If you knew it, you would no longer be possessed, because you are only truly possessed when you mistake the possessing entity for who you are. That is to say, when you become it. Now let's jump ahead to page 131, where it's also highlighted. Alienation means you don't feel at ease in any situation, any place, or with any person, not even with yourself. You're always trying to get home, but never feel at home. And then there is the birth of emotion. In addition to the movement of thought, although not entirely separate from it, there is another dimension to the ego. Emotion. This is not to say that all things and all emotions are of the ego. They turn into ego only when you identify with them. And they take you over completely. That is to say, when they become I. The physical organism, your body, has its own intelligence, as does the organism of every other life form. And that intelligence reacts to what your mind is saying, reacts to your thoughts. So emotion is the body's reaction to your mind. The body's intelligence is, of course, an inseparable part of universal intelligence. One of its countless manifestations, it gives temporary cohesion to the atoms and molecules that make up your physical organism. This is true for any life form. The same intelligence that brought the plant into physical form and then manifests as the flower that comes out of the plant, the flower that opens its petals in the morning to receive the rays of the sun and closes them at night. It is the same intelligence that manifests as Gaia, the complex living being that is planet Earth. All right. We're going to now jump ahead to page 138. But first, I would like you to please, for just a moment, practice that presence yet again. Notice your breath, and each time your mind drifts, gently return to the sensation of breathing. I will watch the timer for about 2 minutes. All right. Greed, selfishness, exploitation, cruelty, and violence are still all pervasive on this planet. Not up here, not up in here, and never again. When you don't recognize them as individual and collective manifestations of an underlying dysfunction or mental illness, we're back on page 73 in The Core of the Ego. The Core of Ego, rather. A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle. Yes, when you don't recognize them as individual and collective manifestations of an underlying dysfunction or mental illness, you fall into the error of personalizing them. You construct a conceptual identity for an individual or group, and you say, this is who he is, this is who they are. When you confuse the ego that you perceive in others with their identity, it is the work of your own ego that uses this misperception to strengthen itself through being right and therefore superior, and through reacting with condemnation, indignation, and often anger against the perceived enemy. All of this is enormously satisfying to the ego. So is that fame, fame, fame. So is that money, 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 money attitude. And the dark siren using seduction and lust, to get more of that money, 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 money. Oh yeah, that's called romance fraud, and we can see it from a mile away. But is it really us seeing it, or is it the ego? But with the awareness of the ego, it's actually awareness. It's awareness. The ego diminishes. That's Source's way of saying it's time to wrap this up. The ego diminishes with that awareness, beloveds. Whether it's myself or you or anyone else. Because none of us and none of it is separate. Strengthening this sense of separation between ourselves and the other, whose otherness has become magnified to such an extent that you can no longer feel your common humanity nor the rootedness in the one life that you share with each human being, your common divinity. Skipping ahead just a little bit, what is it in them that you find most upsetting and most disturbing? Their selfishness, their greed, their need for power and control, their insincerity, dishonesty, propensity to violence, or whatever it may be. Anything that you resent and strongly react to in another is also in you. But the same can be said for them. Anything that they say about you. Any of it. If they're ever led in any way, shape, or form to announce it, it is within them. The insincerity, the dishonesty, the propensity, the violence. Anything that they resent and strongly react to. But it is no more than a form of ego, and as such, it is completely impersonal. It has nothing to do with who that person is, nor has it anything to do with who you are. Only if you mistake it for who you are can observing it within you be threatening to your sense of self. Whatever you fight, you strengthen. What you resist persists. And that is where that lion, animal spirit, and totem energy comes in. And it has become a permanent addition to this channel, as well as the teachings of Law of One, and excerpts from A New Earth, awakening to your life's purpose. I continue to awaken, and I'm only stating this for contextual purposes only. I am awakening to my purpose as an elder, stepping into my calling even more so in that era. As a forever student, teacher, and an omnist, seeing the common truth in all, and in all of you. through that awareness, again, it diminishes the ego. In all cases, causes concerns, conflicts, and confrontations dissolve into nothingness. Right along with that attachment to the ego that creates the dysfunction leading to anger, jealousy, and unhappiness. Awakening to a new state of consciousness. Following the path to our truly fulfilling existence. And this, beloveds, is where we come in as students, but also builders, teachers, and leaders of the new earth. 5555 on the timer. Change is gonna come. Yes, it is. The winds of change are blowing. Going deeper into that awareness. And that is the message. I want to thank you so very much for listening. I would like to hear an insight from each of you who listen. What is one thing you take away about ego, comparison, self-worth? 5656 on the timer to leave you with Eckhart's words. Awareness is the greatest agent for change. May we carry this awareness with us into our daily lives, catching the ego when it seeks comparison and returning instead to presence. And although you cannot see it, I bow with gratitude and appreciation. Multiversal soul, familia, with much gratitude, of course, and appreciation from my heart chakra to yours. Brightest of blessings.